In this documentary, we will explore what lies beneath the surface of a land known more for light than shadow, a place shaped by earthquakes, but fractured by older force zones that still whisper in the mountains, deserts, and coasts of the far west. We will follow the forgotten stories, examine the sites erased from maps, and question what it means when history ends in ellipses, not periods. You will hear the legends, trace the symbols, and decide for yourself what California has been hiding all along. Because what we call California is only one version of the story. There is another, a version not written in gold rush letters or Hollywood scripts, but carved into ancient stone, whispered in tribal tongues, encoded in alignments of boulders no one remembers placing. This land holds more than vineyards, and visions it holds memory. Deep, layered, fractured memory. The kind that doesn't vanish, only buries itself just deep enough to be ignored until someone goes looking. This isn't a story about cities. It's a story about what the cities were built on top of. It begins in places that don't show up on travel guidescapes with walls marked in red ochre. Mountaintops where strange lights linger. Desert valleys where machines fail and time seems to fold. This California is older than the missions, older than the tribes, older perhaps than history itself. Some say the earth here cracked because of fault lines. Others say something wanted out. From the scorched petroglyphs of the Mojave, to hidden chambers in the Sierra Nevada, to stone circles long swallowed by chaparral, there are clues, unconnected at first glance. But they form a pattern if you follow close enough. Ancient observatories disguised as rock piles, geoglyphs only visible from above, disappearances without explanation, legends of beings from the sky, not gods, not angels, but something in between, not worshipped, not loved, just remembered. And the remembering is what matters. Because in a land where so much is burned, buried, or bulldozed, the fragments that remain carry weight, spiritual weight, emotional weight, the kind that pulls at you even if you don't understand why. Something in your bones recognizes it, a place out of place, a hum behind the silence, a path that feels older than your feet. In the chapters ahead, we will journey across this forgotten California. We will listen to voices that were never meant to be silenced. We will question what lies beneath beauty. And we will ask the oldest question of all, what happened here before we were allowed to ask? In the parched heart of California's high desert, where wind carves silence into stone and the sun burns everything but memory, there lies a place few speak of and even fewer find. It is not marked on any modern map, though some claim it once was before the pages were revised. A barren stretch beyond the last utility pole, beyond the last paved road, where ancient black rock rises like broken skin from the earth. Here, among the jagged outcrops of the Mojave, symbols appear, carved not by time or weather, but by deliberate hands, thousands of them, spirals, humanoid figures, animals, and something else. Something not quite human, not quite myth. The desert wind howls through the canyons, but it cannot erase what is etched in basalt. They call it the Koso Range. But long before it had a name, it was a place of reverence and perhaps of warning. The petroglyphs here are older than most civilizations. Some scholars suggest 0 years. Others dare not guess. There are too many, spread across too vast a canvas of volcanic stone, as if someone was trying desperately to record something before it was forgotten, or buried, or taken. The locals speak of it in fragments. Some remember stories passed down tales of sky people, of beings who descended during the burning season. Others say the glyphs are a calendar, a map, a prophecy waiting to be read backwards. But to whom were they speaking? One panel stands out among the rest, a towering wall, covered in deeply carved shapes that seem to pulse with meaning. A series of concentric circles, a figure with outstretched arms surrounded by radiating lines, and a set of three-pronged shapes never before seen elsewhere. Archaeologists document, tourists photograph, but the land watches. Always. Some who visit say they hear whispers, not voices, exactly, but tones. Low, rhythmic vibrations that seem to emanate from the stone itself. Equipment fails here. Batteries drain faster than expected. Shadows stretch at odd angles, even when the sun is high. And some claim that at dusk, just as the last light vanishes behind the peaks, the carvings glow faintly like something within them is waking up. Military installations now surround the area, signs warn of trespassing. Drones patrol the sky. Some believe this is to protect the fragile glyphs. Others believe it's to protect something else, something beneath them. Because there are rumors, always rumors, of tunnels, of chambers carved deep into the mountain, of a hum below the ground that doesn't match any machine. In one such story, an engineer stationed nearby claimed to have seen a light one night, an orb, bright and silent, hovering just above the petroglyph wall. It moved with intent, pausing over certain symbols as if reading them. Then it blinked out. The next day, the man resigned his post. His report was sealed. But others remember. This is how it is in California's ancient places. The mystery doesn't announce itself. It hums beneath the noise. It waits behind the veil of rational explanations and sanctioned history. And it reveals itself only in fragments like dreams you forget upon waking, but still feel in your bones. The Koso petroglyphs are not just remnants. They are remnants with a pulse. And if you listen long enough, you may begin to hear what they're trying to say. Not in language, but in pattern. Not in logic, but in presence. They were not made for us, but we were meant to find them. In the hills beyond the reach of Los Angeles, where the city's electric heartbeat fades into a distant hum, there lies a forgotten stretch of land, scarred by silence. Here, amid the dusty canyons and dry creek beds of the Santa Susana Mountains, stories linger, like smoke half seen, half remembered. No billboards, no hiking apps, just sun-bleached rock, rusted gates, and a name spoken in hushed tones by those who know what was buried and what never should have been unearthed. They call it the lab, but it was more than that. It was a facility of secrets known officially as the Santa Susana Field Laboratory, but known locally for what the ground remembers. Nuclear experiments, rocket tests, accidents cloaked in silence. But beneath the metal ruins and concrete slabs, there's something older, something stranger. Long before engineers built fences, before fuel ignited the sky, the land had its own stories. And they don't align with any manual. Some say the land shakes not because of fault lines, but because something underneath is unsettled. That the ground hums late at night, long after the wind has stopped. That shapes move between the oak trees where no paths exist. These aren't just local legends. They are threads in a tapestry of unease, passed from rancher to hiker, from whisper to whisper. Indigenous tribes once avoided these hills, calling them sacred and sometimes dangerous. Not because of beasts or weather, but because of openings, thin places, they said, where the earth folded in on itself and doorways appeared. Doorways to what? They would not say. What remains today are the shells of buildings and trails overtaken by brush. But people still come. Not many. Just enough to keep the stories alive. Some say they see lights with no source, or feel watched when no one is there. Others return home with memories that don't quite align with time. Hours missing, dreams that echo with machinery, and windless voices. A few claim to have found carvings and rock symbols, not from any known language, etched near vents in the hillside where warm air sometimes rises without cause. There are rumors of underground chambers, of sealed tunnels hidden beneath the debris. Some speak of a structure buried deep in the rock, untouched since the days when the land belonged only to myth. A place not built, but uncovered. When questioned, authorities cite contamination and safety. They don't speak of the rituals, the ones said to have been performed before the facility even existed, the ones said to call out across time. Sometimes, truth hides best in places where no one is looking anymore. A padlocked gate, a weathered sign, a story told only to those who already suspect. And in those spaces between science and superstition, something waits, not for rescue, not for discovery, just to be witnessed, just once more, because the land remembers what we try to forget. And the mountains above Los Angeles are not just backdrops, they are vaults. and sometimes vaults breathe. Far to the north, where California's coastline fractures into rugged cliffs and the Pacific crashes endlessly below, there is a place where the land folds into itself like an unfinished thought. Here, amid the towering redwoods and the veils of perpetual mist, stands a stretch of coastline few visit and fewer understand. Locals call it the Lost Coast, not because it is impossible to find, but because something about it resists being known. Maps may mark its boundaries, but they do not capture its atmosphere. Time behaves differently here. Sound disappears into the fog, and what little history exists has gaps large enough to swallow entire stories. Before any road was built, the native peoples of this region spoke of watchers in the trees and beings who moved without sound across the hills. They didn't name them. They didn't ask questions. They simply didn't go there. Some called it a land out of balance. Not cursed, but disturbed. Marked. And if you walk the dense trails between Petrolia and Shelter Cove today, that feeling persists. The trees lean at odd angles. The moss is too thick. The silence feels shaped. Some hikers speak of hearing whispers carried by the wind, unintelligible, but rhythmic, as though the forest is reciting a memory not meant for human ears. More curiously, scattered across certain coastal clearings are formations of stone that defy easy explanation. Circles, spirals, lines pointing inland etched, not with tools, but as if fused by heat. Some researchers dismiss them as geological anomalies. Others quietly document the way they align with solstice events, star patterns, and magnetic deviations. Devices malfunction here. Compasses spin or freeze. GPS trails vanish mid-hike. It is as if the landscape edits itself in real time, hiding what it doesn't want seen. And then there are the lights. Fishermen report orbs dancing over the water bluish, hovering just above the waves. They flicker in and out of existence, vanishing the moment anyone gets too close. Locals say the lights are older than boats, that they've been seen long before lighthouses or sea charts. Some believe they are echoes of something below the surface, perhaps trapped beneath the sea, or waiting for the right observer. Others think they are watchers, not malevolent, just aware. There's an old weather station at the edge of the cliffs, long since abandoned. Inside, notebooks remain, pages smeared with moisture and time, but some are legible. They speak of pressure changes unconnected to storms, of howling winds that rise without pattern, of dreams among the staff that synchronized over time, different people dreaming the same place. A clearing, a fire, a circle of stones, and a figure with no face standing at its center. The government closed the station, citing budget cuts. The locals believe otherwise. The Lost Coast is not just remote, it's protected, but not by any agency. The protection is organic, atmospheric. The terrain itself repels progress. Roads wash out. Construction fails. Signals vanish. It's not empty, it's full. Full of something that doesn't want to be explained. And in a state where almost every acre has been claimed, named, charted, and reshaped, this stretch of wild defiance feels sacred or warned, because sometimes land isn't lost. It walks away on purpose. In the scorched expanse east of the Sierra Nevada, where the desert wind peels the sky into silence and the stones remember more than the books do, there is a lake that vanishes and returns. A lake that shouldn't be there. A lake that listens. They call it Owen's Lake now, though in truth, it's less a lake than a memory of one. Once vast and shimmering, it was drained for the thirst of distant cities. But even in its dried state, even in the dust storms that rise from its alkali plains, it holds something ancient beneath its cracked surface, something that was never meant to be uncovered. Local tribes spoke of the lake, not as water, but as spirit. They warned that to disturb its floor was to stir what sleeps beneath. The Paiute told stories of shadowed things that emerged only when the lake ran low, figures made of dust and breathless wind, who spoke no language but left behind dreams too vivid to ignore. These were not monsters. They were memories. They were warnings. In the 1930s, As water was diverted and the lake bed cracked open like a scab, strange formations began to appear. Geometric patterns etched into the earth, not deep, but precise. Circles within squares, long lines pointing to nowhere, or perhaps pointing to something that no longer exists. Aerial surveys in later decades revealed even more. Massive earth shapes only visible from the sky. Glyphs too large to be felt from the ground, too perfect to be accidental. Some researchers dismissed them as natural salt formations. Others went quiet after initial reports. A few who studied them up close returned with nosebleeds, skin rashes, disorientation. One man, a cartographer with the Department of Interior, disappeared entirely. His truck was found a mile from the center of the pattern. Engine off, driver's door open, boots still on the ground. He left behind a notebook, half burned, half legible. The final page read, "It hums underneath, like breath, but older." The military came soon after, not in force, but in silence. No-fly zones were established over the lake bed for a time, then lifted, then quietly reinstated without public notice. No one talks about what was found if anything was. But old pilots whisper of anomalies, instruments that failed mid-flight, shadows on the sand that didn't match the shape of their aircraft, lights beneath the surface that shimmered briefly, like heat mirages with intent. In the years that followed, art installations began appearing along the shore. Obelisks made of mirror, abstract metal structures, all attributed to anonymous creators. But none have ever stepped forward. Locals say the art isn't new, that it's a recreation, that someone is trying to speak back to whatever once spoke from the lake bed. Even now, the wind that passes over Owens Lake doesn't feel empty. It carries grit, yes, but also a kind of frequency, a pressure just beyond hearing, like the space between two radio stations. If you stand in the center during dusk, when the air cools and the shadows stretch long, it feels as though the ground beneath you is hollow, listening, measuring. Some places aren't haunted by what happened. They are haunted by what never got the chance to. And sometimes, draining a lake doesn't just reveal the bottom. It opens a door. Deep in the Central Valley, where fields stretch endlessly like woven cloth and the horizon shimmers with dust and pesticides, there lies a mound. Not a hill, not a rise. A mound. Too round. Too deliberate. Farmers plow around it. Developers avoid it. Locals don't speak of it directly, they just call it the old place. To the untrained eye, it's nothing. Just a slight elevation in the earth, surrounded by almond trees and irrigation canals. But the mound has never been touched. Not once. Not in living memory. Not even in drought years, when every other parcel was bulldozed, scraped, planted. This one remains, untouched, as if the land itself refuses. No markers stand there, no signs. But those who've lived in the valley long enough know the stories. The Yokuts once held ceremonies there. They said it was a place where the sky came closest to the ground, a hinge point, a place where spirits moved freely, not from the dead, but from something older, something that existed before death and life split into separate meanings. Elders whispered that if you slept near the mound, your dreams would not be your own. In the late 1960s, a graduate student from UC Davis tried to excavate it. He'd received a small grant, borrowed equipment, and planned to spend 2 weeks studying what he assumed was an ancient burial site. He left the first night, drove away without packing. His notes were incoherent. Pages of spirals, repeated words. The phrase, "they're inside it," written over and over, he never published again. More recently, a drone enthusiast attempted to map the area with thermal imaging. The footage was clear until it reached the mound. Then the signal glitched. A burst of static, followed by a single frame showing something impossible. The mound glowing, not from heat, but from within, as if a pulse moved through it. The next frame was black. Soil samples taken near the base show mineral combinations not found elsewhere in the region. Metallic traces that suggest something beneath. Something large, dense, shaped. But when a geological team proposed a subsurface scan, the equipment failed to calibrate 3 times. Each failure blamed on operator error until the project was quietly abandoned. Birds avoid it. Dogs refuse to step near it. And those who've stood close describe a kind of pressure in the air, not sound, not wind, but presence, like standing beside someone who hasn't yet spoken. There are those who believe the mound is not a remnant, but a signal, that it was not built to contain something, but to transmit, that its perfect roundness is not ceremonial, but functional, not a grave, a lens. And if so, then perhaps it has always been waiting, not for us to find it, but for something to answer back. At night, when fog rolls through the valley and the hum of distant traffic dies, some say you can hear a vibration near the mound, like distant drums played through the soil, like a call no one wants to admit they understand. Because some places in California don't echo the past, they anticipate something else. And sometimes the oldest silence is not memory, it is waiting. Along the jagged spine of the eastern Sierra, where snow lingers deep into spring and granite cliffs rise like the bones of the earth, lies a lake as black as obsidian. It's not large, it's not famous, but it has a name few speak outside of whispers. Mono, a word that sounds unfinished, like a sentence cut short, like a memory trying to form. Mono Lake is ancient, older than the mountains that surround it, older than the civilizations that came and went on its shores. It is a terminal lake, fed by mountain snow and never drained. Everything flows in, nothing flows out. The water is thick, heavy with salt and minerals. Nothing lives in it but brine shrimp and flies. And yet, the lake moves. It shifts. It breathes. Its waters rise and fall, with a rhythm that has little to do with climate. And in the shallows, formations grow tufa, tower columns of stone that rise like petrified roots from the underworld. But some of them grow too straight, too smooth, as if shaped not by chemistry, but by intent. They form rings, lines, even symbols, if viewed from above. For centuries, the Paiute spoke of Mono as a place of spirit, not rest, not danger, just threshold. They said the waters held a memory of something before the earth was firm, before shape and shadow took sides, and that those who entered the lake's edge on certain nights might not return quite the same, not because of death, because of exchange. In the 1980s, a researcher from Berkeley was studying the microbial life within the lake. She documented anomalies in the water's electrical conductivity, small pulses, like heartbeats. She found that at specific times of day, usually just before dawn, the pulses would align across sensors spaced miles apart. The pattern was rhythmic, repeating, predictable. Then it stopped. The data vanished from the servers. Her paper was never published. She stopped speaking publicly altogether. Photographers who visit Mono Lake often report lens malfunctions, not errors, strangeness. Fog on dry days, shadow streaks across long exposures, orbs of light that appear in one frame and disappear in the next, with no visible source. When processed in sequence, the photos sometimes reveal motion trails of light, moving in curved, deliberate paths across the lake's surface, as if being watched or mapped. The most unsettling stories, though, come from the old guard fishermen, rangers, loners, who've spent their lives near the lake's edge. They speak of low sounds, just beneath the range of hearing. A tone that builds pressure in the skull, a sensation of being measured. And sometimes, when the lake is completely still, they claim to see figures standing in the water, not walking, not floating, just there, motionless, watching the shore. Satellite imagery has shown changes in the lake bed patterns that resemble crop circles, only made of mineral, not plants. Each time they appear, they're gone within weeks, washed away, dissolved, or erased. No one is sure. Mono Lake is not beautiful in the way other lakes are. It's stark, alien, but it holds gravity. A pull not just on the body, but on the mind. And when the wind dies down and the last light fades, the tufa towers begin to look less like formations and more like instruments, waiting to resonate, waiting for sound, waiting for return. Some places don't exist for us. They exist for the memory of what was. and Mono Lake remembers. South of San Luis Obispo, where Highway 1 carves its winding path between cliffs and ocean, there's a stretch of land that looks like any other part of the coast until you stop and listen. Not to the waves, but to the silence between them. There, nestled in a forest of coastal oaks, lies a path unmarked by signs. No trailhead, no fence, just a subtle gap in the trees, where the wind grows quiet and birds refuse to follow. Hikers call it the vanishing trail, because no matter how far you walk, you never feel farther from where you started. The light doesn't change, the trees don't thin, the space bends inward. Those who live nearby speak of the land as unsettled, not haunted, not cursed, just resistant to being known. They say compasses don't work past a certain point, that GPS loops or freezes, that dogs refuse to step inside. Some who enter describe a buzzing behind the eyes, like the pressure before a storm, but the sky remains clear. Always clear. And then there are those who don't speak about it at all, who returned, but won't say what happened. Only that something changed. In them. Around them. The Chumash once used the area for vision quests, though they avoided sleeping within its inner grove. They believed the trees there were watchers, that they were not trees at all, but something older in disguise. Guardians of a place where the world folds. A soft spot, they called it. Not weak, just thin. A veil. A place where time forgets itself. In the early 2000s, a geologist named Marlowe conducted a private survey of the area. He believed the land was sitting atop a fault line no one had documented. What he found instead were magnetic irregularities pulses that rose and fell every 33 seconds, like a signal buried deep. His instruments overloaded. He left the site abruptly, never filed a report, and later denied ever visiting. But a colleague kept his field notes. They speak of sounds below the earth, not seismic activity tones. Low, repeating tones, like a machine waking up. Some hikers who've spent the night near the grove claim their dreams were synchronized. They saw the same image, a circular structure underground, lit by a pale blue glow, humming with patterns too complex to follow. And a single doorway, always closed, always humming. There are no official studies of the region. The land is publicly accessible, but not maintained. Yet it remains pristine, untouched, as if nothing stays long enough to leave a mark. And those who do try who camp, who light fires, who carve their names say they return days later to find the signs gone, as if erased. What is most peculiar is what's not there. No insects, no fallen limbs, no decay. The forest floor looks swept, curated, but no one maintains it. No one admits to knowing who owns it. And yet the boundaries are observed, instinctively, as if the land itself chooses who may enter and who must forget. Some say it's a natural anomaly. Others whisper of ancient technology buried and dormant. But perhaps it's neither. Perhaps it's just a place where the world forgot to close a door, and the space behind it is breathing, waiting, listening. Not all mysteries roar. Some exhale. In the far northeast corner of California, where forests grow dense and roads dissolve into gravel, a lake hides in plain sight. Its waters are dark, its shores empty, and its history fragmented. They call it Goose Lake, though geese rarely land there anymore. Satellite images show it shrinking, swelling, retreating from its edges, as if it resists containment. But that's not the mystery. The mystery is beneath the surface, in the sudden drops and trenches carved into the lakebed trenches that don't match any glacial theory, any erosion model, trenches that some believe were cut by design. Long before maps drew borders here, the Achomawi and Modoc tribes warned of the waters. They spoke of lights beneath the waves, and of voices that echoed from the shore during windless nights. They believed the lake was a mouth, not a metaphor, a literal mouth that spoke when angered. Ceremonies were held near the shallows, not to honor it but to calm it, to silence whatever stirred within. In the 1970s, a series of sonic tests were performed on the lakebed, intended to study mineral density. What the surveyors found was a hollow chamber beneath the western floor roughly the size of a cathedral, with no known entrance, no natural formation to explain its acoustics. When the data was submitted, it was flagged and withheld. The team was reassigned. One member later wrote anonymously that the sound didn't echo in the chamber it absorbed, like sound was being taken in. In winter, when the lake freezes, cracks form not just on the surface, but in the air. Locals report hearing tones, dissonant and melodic, that vibrate the bones more than the ears, as if the ice is singing. A ranger once described it as a choir made of teeth. He laughed when he said it, but his eyes didn't. Divers have gone down, not many. Visibility is poor, silt thick. But those who return speak of a pressure down there, an instinct to rise, a sense that they were not alone even when their lights found no movement. One diver quit halfway through the dive. She surfaced shaking, dropped her gear on the bank, and left without speaking a word. On the lake's northern shore, hidden behind a curtain of pines, lies a concrete pillar. No plaque, no path leading to it. Just a smooth 4-foot-high column with grooves along its top like something meant to hold a device, or perhaps transmit one. No records exist of its placement. Satellite records don't show it arriving, but it is there. And if you touch it, you feel a vibration, subtle, continuous, like the ticking of a clock, not meant for us. Goose Lake does not advertise itself. No visitors center, no gift shop, just water, shadow, and the weight of something unasked. And sometimes, when the clouds hang low and the trees still their breath, the lake whispers not in language, but in sensation. A reminder that not all mouths speak. Some simply wait to be opened. Because silence is not always absence. Sometimes, silence is the oldest form of presence. Beneath the surface of the Pacific, just beyond the cliffs of Malibu, lies a formation that shouldn't exist. It is not labeled on nautical maps. It does not appear in textbooks. And yet it is there clearly, undeniably visible from satellite images and sonar scans. A massive, table-like structure resting on the ocean floor, flanked by what appear to be vertical pillars and a central opening wide enough to swallow a submarine. They call it the Malibu Anomaly, but no one can say what it is. Some claim it's natural, a coincidental alignment of rock and erosion. Others aren't so sure. The shape is too precise, the columns too evenly spaced, the roof too flat as if built, not formed. Divers who've attempted to approach it have reported equipment failures, sudden disorientation, and strange currents that push rather than pull. One drone sent to record footage lost signal mid-transmission, but not before capturing a single frame of something that looks disturbingly like an archway, flanked by symmetrical ridges carved into the stone. The Chumash people who lived along these shores for centuries tell stories of doorways beneath the waves, not to the underworld, to the otherworld. A parallel realm accessed only through sacred entrances hidden by tide and time. They spoke of sea beings not mermaids, not monsters but figures, made of water and memory, surfacing only when the land above had forgotten how to listen. In the 1950s, radar operators at a nearby naval station picked up anomalies off the coast blips that moved too fast, turned too sharply, and vanished too completely to be conventional. These events were logged, dismissed, then reclassified. Years later, retired personnel revealed that every sighting occurred directly above the same coordinates those of the anomaly. Some began to whisper of an underwater base, though no one could say who or what it belonged to. And yet, no official expedition has ever been funded, not publicly. Marine biologists who've studied the surrounding area have noted oddities in animal behavior. Pods of dolphins circling the site for hours without feeding. Whales breaching in geometric patterns. Fish disappearing entirely for weeks, then returning all at once. Sonar reflections that come back distorted, as if something behind the formation bends sound itself. And then there are the dreams. People who live along the cliffs above the anomaly report vivid, shared imagery of vast stone halls beneath green light, of voices speaking in tones rather than words, of descending into darkness, not with fear, but with recognition. Many of these people have never met, yet their descriptions align too perfectly to dismiss. Artists have tried to paint what they see. The images are striking pillars, gateways, spirals, always spirals. The question remains, if the formation is not natural, then what is it? A ruin? A machine? A threshold? Or is it all of those things, depending on who arrives and when? The sea forgets nothing. It holds memory better than stone, deeper than bone. And perhaps this structure, hidden beneath waves and denial, is not an invitation. Perhaps it is a message left for the future, carved into the crust of the world, waiting for us to remember how to read it. Because some mysteries do not emerge from the ocean. They rise just far enough for us to ask why they were ever buried. Hidden within the tangled woods of Northern California's Siskiyou County lies a mountain older than memory, wrapped not in snow or stone, but in stories. Mount Shasta. Not the tallest peak, not the most dangerous, but perhaps the most watched. The mountain does not roar, but it pulses, quietly, persistently, as if breathing beneath its crust. And those who've stood in its shadow will tell you, it's not just a mountain, it's something else, wearing the shape of one. Indigenous tribes spoke of Shasta as a sacred being, not a location. A place where earth touched sky, not in elevation, but in spirit. They told of entities who lived within figures made of light and ice, neither god nor ghost, who emerged in times of great imbalance. When the settlers came, those stories twisted. By the early 20th century, myths of underground cities began to spread, of Lemurian stall beings with glowing eyes and flowing robes, walking silently through caverns filled with crystal light. Some say the tales were inventions. Others believe they were recollections, not of fantasy, but of contact. Hikers describe strange patterns in the snow-perfect circles, with no footprints leading to or from them. Campers wake to find their compasses spinning, their clocks frozen. There are accounts of people vanishing for hours, returning confused, unaware that time has passed. And above the peak, reports of lights blue, violet, gold hovering soundlessly, changing direction against the wind. Official explanations range from atmospheric conditions to weather balloons, but the lights remain. In the 1980s, a geologist conducting a magnetic survey near the southern slope detected a reading so extreme it shorted his instruments. When he returned weeks later, the anomaly was gone, or moved. He documented the event in a private paper, never published, but passed among a few curious minds. His conclusion: the mountain is alive, not biologically, energetically. Old photographs from early surveyors show something even stranger: structures, brief glimpses of doorways carved into ice, of unnatural shadows at ridgelines. Most of these were dismissed as lens artifacts. But in one photograph, archived in a private collection, a figure appears near the summit. Tall, robed, featureless, impossible to scale, and yet there it is, caught between one frame and the next. People who live near Mount Shasta report dreams, recurring visions of descending through stone corridors, of standing before a glowing obelisk that hums with voices too layered to separate. Artists, writers, and wanderers are drawn here, often without knowing why. Some leave changed, others don't leave at all. The entrances, if they exist, have never been found. Or perhaps they were never meant for the outside world. Perhaps the mountain doesn't open by excavation or exploration, but by resonance, by intent. Like a lock that turns only when the right soul stands before it. Mount Shasta does not demand belief. It only waits. It doesn't offer proof. It offers presence. And in that presence, something stirs not in the mountain, but in the person who dares to look too long. Because some places don't just hold mystery, they are mystery. Tucked within the fog-kissed valleys of Mendocino County, obscured by redwoods and thyme, lies a grove unlike any other. It has no name, no signage, just a narrow gravel path that curves away from the main road like a forgotten thought. Locals call it the still place, not because it's quiet, though it is, but because something in it does not move, not wind, not shadow, not even memory. As if time itself gets trapped among the trees. These redwoods are wrong. Not in height or species, but in silence. They don't creak, they don't rustle, Even in wind, their branches remain unnaturally still. Some who've entered say they could hear their own heartbeat, louder than footsteps, louder than breath. Others say the sound disappears entirely, replaced by a ringing behind the eyes. A sensation not of fear but of being measured. Long ago, the Pomo tribe avoided this grove, referring to it only in fragments, as if language resisted describing it. In oral traditions, they spoke of a circle of trees, grown not from seed, but from memory. A place that marked not the past or future, but the in-between. They believe spirits didn't pass through this place. They gathered here, waiting. In 1993, a surveyor mapping water access for a nearby plot recorded anomalies in barometric pressure, minute, rhythmic changes, like breathing. He ran multiple tests, convinced it was a mechanical error. Then, just as abruptly, the readings returned to normal. But his final note remains. The forest has a pulse. What lies at the center of the grove is stranger still, a natural stone ring, just wide enough for a person to stand inside. Not cut, not built, but placed, somehow, as if the ground rose up around a memory and crystallized it. Moss grows thick on everything around it, except the stones. The stones remain bare, untouched, dry even in rain. Photographs refuse to behave here. Cameras overexpose or underexpose without cause. Videos jitter, distort. Audio clips capture frequencies inaudible to the earlobe, rolling tones that fall into patterns when slowed down. Some believe these are remnants of chance. Others believe they're not remnants at all, but signals continuing to this day. Visitors often describe dreams in the days after their visit. They dream of standing inside the stone ring, surrounded by towering trees that bend inward not physically, but perceptually, like the entire forest is focusing, listening. And above, where no opening should exist, a single shaft of light blue pulsing descends like a question, or a memory waiting to be answered. No maps mark this place. No guidebooks mention it. But it appears again and again in quiet conversations, in whispered warnings, in symbols carved into driftwood found miles away along the coast, as if the forest sends fragments of itself out, searching for those who will return. Some believe it's an ancient observatory. Others think it's a resonance chamber. But perhaps it is neither. Perhaps it is a place that listens more than it speaks, that observes more than it reveals. A place not meant to be found, but remembered without knowing why. Because some mysteries are not lost. They're waiting for the right mind to arrive and remember what it never knew it forgot. In the high desert east of Death Valley, far from gas stations and highways, there exists a valley that does not welcome visitors. It does not repel them either. It simply ignores them, as if human presence is irrelevant. The locals call it Furnace Wash, though no official name marks its place. From above, it looks like any other stretch of desert sand, shale, sunburnt rock. But from within, something shifts. Angles don't add up. Shadows linger too long. And the air hums not loud, but steady, like the static of an old television left on without signal. The valley has no trails, no reliable GPS signal. Compass needles twitch as if trying to make a decision. Those who have wandered in describe a sensation not of being watched, but of being cataloged, as though something is taking inventory not of who they are, but what they carry, their thoughts, their intent, their memory. Old mining maps from the 19th century marked the area as inhospitable. One even had the words "void ahead" written in the margin. But there is no record of a void, no sinkhole, no cave system, just a vast, still landscape that seems to fold in on itself the longer you remain. Stranger still are the stones. Scattered across the dry floor of the wash are small clusters of polished black rocketchich, arranged in tight spirals or concentric circles. Not natural formations. Not the result of wind or erosion. Placed. Intentionally. They're warm to the touch, even at night. And beneath them, according to a handful of geologists who've dared study the site, the soil shows elevated radiation. Not dangerous, just wrong. In the 1970s, a pair of amateur astronomers hiked into the valley to escape light pollution. What they found instead was silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that presses on your eardrums. One of them reported seeing flickers of light on the valley rim like reflections, but from what? There were no objects, just the echo of movement. They left after one night. The other never returned to the desert again. There are theories, of course, that Furnace Wash is a geological anomaly, that it sits on an ancient impact site or a collapsed lava tube, but none of these explain the dreams. Yes, the dreams. Those who spend even an hour within the wash often report vivid visions in the days that follow. Of corridors beneath sand, of massive metal structures humming in the dark, of voices not speaking but intoning. A low, droning language that feels like memory turned inside out. Some believe something is buried beneath the valley. A craft, a machine, a seed. Others think the valley itself is alive, that its geometry is wrong, not because it's broken, but because it belongs to something else, another architecture entirely. And perhaps that's the real mystery. Furnace Wash doesn't hide its presence. It simply exists in a register we aren't tuned to hear, a broadcast from before maps, before speech, before our minds were shaped to ignore what doesn't fit. Because not every mystery is dramatic. Some just hum, quietly, constantly, until someone finally listens. On the outskirts of Ridgecrest, where suburban streets bleed into dust and the Mojave begins reclaiming space, sits a stretch of earth that glows in photographs but dims in person. It is not marked. It does not appear in any geological record, but those who've lived near it call it the burn. A half-mile ring of desert terrain where nothing grows, nothing nests, and the sand shifts with unnatural consistency. Not fluid like dunes, not cracked like clay, just soft, too soft, as if it's been sifted, as if something beneath is moving, slowly, with patience. Satellite images taken over 2 decades show a consistent circular formation, never expanding, never shrinking, just fixed. The soil tests have returned inconclusive. No chemical imbalance, no heat residue, no radiation, and yet animals will not cross the perimeter. Insects avoid it. Even the wind seems to bend around its edge. Long before Ridgecrest was a name on a map, the Koso people told stories of a sacred basin where the earth had swallowed a fire too powerful to extinguish. A fire that still lived beneath, dreaming. They described strange lights above the ground on moonless nights, blue and green, pulsing slowly, as if sinking to breath. Those stories faded with time, but the lights remain. In the early 2000s, a team of amateur archaeologists ventured into the burn to study what they believed was an ancient ceremonial site. They brought ground-penetrating radar and infrared sensors. Within minutes, the equipment failed. All of it. Power drained, footage lost. But one thermal camera recorded a single frame before cutting out. It showed a geometric pattern beneath the surface, faint, concentric, precise, a design not visible to the eye, something carved or constructed beneath the sand. Reports from drone operators suggest a slight magnetic distortion within the burn. Compasses don't spin, but they drift slowly, steadily, like they're being pulled toward a center that no one can find. One drone, flying directly over the center, captured an audio anomaly, low-frequency hum, barely audible, that seemed to pulse in intervals of 5 seconds. The audio file, when played through a spectrogram, revealed shapes, not random noise, glyphs, symbols layered within sound. And then there are the dreams again. Visitors report a common sequence. Standing on the edge of the burn at dusk, feeling the sand shift beneath them, hearing a tone they can't quite place. Then descent, not falling, but being drawn downward, into a space that feels infinite and narrow at the same time. A chamber of mirrored surfaces. A voice, not heard but felt, whispering a single word they can never remember upon waking. Those who return from the burn describe a disorientation that lingers for days. Some speak slower, others draw symbols compulsively. A few simply stop talking altogether, as if words no longer suffice. Theories: very ancient machine, impact zone, failed experiment. But perhaps the burn is not a thing, but a process, a slow awakening, a recalibration point for the earth itself. Not broken, not wounded, just changing. And we, like insects near a shifting fault, only feel the surface tremble without understanding the cause. Some places do not seek our attention. They test our ability to perceive them. And the burn is not trying to be discovered. It is trying to be remembered. High in the hills above Santa Barbara, where mansions crumble into chaparral and fire-scorched trees cling to steep ravines, there is a road that fades into myth. Gibraltar Road. To most, it's just a winding stretch of pavement, popular with cyclists and lost tourists. But to a few those who have driven it late at night, alone, with their headlights carving tunnels through the fogget, is something else entirely. A road that doesn't lead but loops. A path not through space, but through memory. There are stories, of course, whispers passed down in online forums between hikers and amateur mystics. People who say they've driven the road for hours only to end up back where they started, even with a full tank of gas and no stops. Others claim the stars shift overhead, constellations out of place, unfamiliar. A few describe hearing their own names called from the canyon softly, and from very far away. Old Spanish records mention a path of forgetting in the hills above the coast, a place where monks once went to meditate and sometimes did not return. They believed the land was holy, but not safe, that it peeled something away from the soul, layer by layer, until only silence remained. More recently, in the 1970s, a physics student from UCSB attempted an experiment. He mounted oscillating sound generators along several bends of the road, attempting to study acoustic distortion in mountain passes. What he found instead was a phenomenon he could not explain. Standing waves that did not dissipate, but reinforced themselves echos that grew stronger with each loop. He recorded hours of data, all of which was confiscated after he submitted a preliminary report to his department. The project was deemed unstable. He dropped out the following year. And then there's the structure. Halfway up the road, hidden behind an overgrown turnout, is a concrete foundation with no visible walls. Just a flat surface, cracked and mossed over, with the faint outline of a circle etched into its center. No record exists of a building there. Locals call it the listening post, though no antenna or cables have ever been found. If you stand in its center at dawn, the world seems to shift slightly to one side as if reality were tilting, just enough to notice. People report missing time here. An hour, sometimes two. Not blackouts, just silence. They remember driving, then suddenly arriving, no sense of distance, no memory of curves. As if something stepped in, carried them forward, then resumed the illusion of movement. A few say they saw things in the corners of their vision shapes beside the road, tall and unmoving, always just behind the trees. There's no official explanation, no warning signs, just a road with too many curves and not enough light. But Gibraltar Road doesn't need caution tape. It has memory. And memory, when folded the right way, becomes a trap, or a signal, or both. Some say the road was once straighter, that something bent it over time, not the asphalt, but the space it occupies. That each turn now isn't just a turn, but a layer. And if you go too far, drive too long, or forget just enough of yourself, the road remembers. And it does not always give you back. Because some places are not meant to be traveled. They are meant to be listened to, once, and then left behind. At the southern edge of the Sultan Sea, where the ground buckles and steam breathes from cracks in the earth, lies a stretch of land few approach and even fewer understand. They call it the mud fields. To outsiders, it looks like chaos boiling gray pools, vents that hiss without fire, and patches of land that tremble without warning. But beneath that chaos is rhythm. Beneath the bubbling and the stink of sulfur, something speaks and pulses. Geologists say it's all explainable mud volcanoes, geothermal activity, natural gas seepage. But that doesn't account for the patterns. Because if you chart the eruptions over time, map the tremors, The steam, the vents, what emerges is not randomness. It's a grid. Imperfect, incomplete, but intentional. Like something vast and invisible breathing through the ground in its own language. The Coil people knew this place. They did not live near it, but they marked it in their oral traditions as the soft mouth of the world, a place where the land was not land, but skin-thin and restless. They believed it was not dangerous, only listening, and they warned against singing there, because sound, in this place, has memory. In 1987, a field technician went missing for 4 days while collecting gas samples. When found, he was dehydrated, shoeless, and sitting cross-legged in a shallow crater. He was unhurt, but changed. He spoke slowly, deliberately, as if translating from another tongue. He would not explain what had happened, only that he had gone under. Months later, his journals were found. They contained drawings not of vents or craters, but of complex geometric shapes overlaid with musical notations. Not notes exactly. Frequencies. Vibrations. Infrasound recordings from the region reveal a persistent hum beneath the threshold of hearing. It's not seismic, it's not industrial. It modulates, shifts, and when run through a spectral analyzer, it forms spirals. Not random noise, but design. An architect speaking through pressure. Satellite photos show that the mud vents move, not drift move. Over time, they migrate, as if responding to something. One cluster reappears every 19 years, forming a near-perfect circle before collapsing and vanishing again. This cycle has been tracked 3 times. The next recurrence is approaching. There are stories of hallucinations here, but they are too specific to ignore. Visitors report visions of vast machines buried beneath the earth, not mechanical, but alive structures of bone and crystal, turning slowly beneath the mud. Some describe hearing their own voice echoing back from below, repeating words they hadn't yet spoken. Others speak of dreams in which the ground opens, not to swallow them, but to show them something, a light, a structure, a chamber, and always the sense that it's not asleep, not forgotten, but waiting. The mud fields are not beautiful, they're unsettling, loud in their silence, messy in their precision, but they hold a kind of gravity, the kind that doesn't pull bodies, but pulls attention, thought, presence, because some places aren't speaking to us in words. They speak in vibration, heat, movement, and if we learn to listen differently, we might realize we're not standing on dead earth, but on a slow, breathing memory. Just west of the Mojave National Preserve, where the desert flattens into silence and the stars burn without interruption, sits a region that cartographers labeled long ago, then quietly forgot. Shadow Valley. No towns, no towers, just scrubland, rock, and a stillness so absolute it feels like standing inside a held breath. But the silence here is deceptive. It hums. Shadow Valley is not empty, it's layered, and those who have driven through it without planning to stop often find that they stop anyway. Not because of engine failure or distraction, but because something insists. A sudden pull to the side of the road, a need to step outside and just listen. Local lore is sparse but consistent. Stories of shimmering figures walking parallel to the road, always just at the edge of vision. Of radios switching stations unprompted, voices speaking languages that fade the moment you try to remember them. Of shadows that stretch the wrong way. One trucker described it best. It's like the desert's watching, but not with eyes, with memory. In 2009, a university drone research group performed a series of flight tests over the area. The airspace was chosen for its remoteness, its clear skies. What they didn't expect was interference. Repeating EM signals disrupted every flight, not strong enough to jam, just enough to distort. They traced the origin to a flat section of basin ringed by low hills. Ground zero for the interference was a perfect circleno vegetation, no debris, just fine gravel, arranged with unnatural uniformity. When they returned days later, the circle was gone, or moved. Long-haul drivers speak of time loss in the valley, not the theatrical kind. Subtle shifts. Arrival at checkpoints earlier than physically possible, or later, with no explanation. One man reported driving past a familiar rock formation 3 times, though he never turned around. Another said his GPS showed him looping in a spiral, even as the road continued in a straight line. What's more curious is the light. Photographs taken at dusk often reveal double shadow zone from the sun, the other from a source no one can find. This secondary shadow always leans inward, toward a central point deep in the valley. Astronomers have attempted to measure anomalies in light polarization here, but their instruments failed to stabilize. One camera recorded an aurora-like shimmer in the air. Despite clear skies and no magnetic storm activity, the footage was lost. But the technician who reviewed it described it as light folding over itself, like it forgot which way was forward. Dreams reported by overnight campers follow a pattern, walking a staircase that descends into open sky, where constellations spin and rearrange like symbols in a code. A voice, not booming, but calm, speaks a single sentence, always different, always personal. One camper, a linguist, awoke and wrote down what she remembered. It was a phrase in a dead Uto-Aztecan dialect, translating loosely to, "We left the doors open." Shadow Valley is not marked on most maps, but it marks you, quietly, without intrusion. Just a nudge, a whisper, a glitch in your perception that grows the longer you try to ignore it. Some places don't reveal the past or the future. They reveal the architecture of reality itself, the scaffolding behind the curtain. And if you stay too long, you begin to feel the difference between the world and the thing holding the world in place. Nestled high above Napa Valley, far from the vineyards and tasting rooms, sits a hill that refuses to settle. Locals call it Glass Hill not because of clarity, but because of reflection. The air above it shimmers in photographs. Not heat distortion, but something denser. And at certain times of day, even the birds avoid flying over it. It is not marked on any wine trail maps, and if you ask longtime residents, most will pretend they've never heard of it. But if you press harder, their voices lower, their eyes drift, and one might finally say, it watches back. The hill itself is unremarkable, rounded, covered in wild grass, and the occasional crooked oak. But those who've stood at its summit describe something difficult to explain. A ringing in the chest, a pressure behind the eyes, as if something beneath the soil is aware of being observed. Not hostile, not curious, just awake. Stories from the Hueco people suggest the hill was once used for sky watching, not for tracking stars, but for tracking what moved between them. They believed the land beneath the hill was hollow, not with caves, but with space that doesn't obey gravity. A place where the sky bends inward and memory gathers like fog. They warned never to bring fire to its peak, because flame, they said, wakes the hill. In the 1960s, a group of experimental physicists visited the region under the guise of soil testing. In truth, they were measuring localized time displacement, something first observed when a nearby vineyard reported irregular grape maturation. Their instruments registered microsecond distortions, not once, repeatedly, always in the same spot. When one scientist returned a year later, he found the soil had shifted, not eroded, shifted as if something below had moved. Hikers tell of a sound that grows louder the closer you walk toward the center of the hilltop. Not a tone, but a layered whisper, just at the edge of comprehension. And in the exact center, the grass doesn't grow. It doesn't die either. It simply refuses. As if the earth, right there, is paused. Thermal imaging taken by a curious drone pilot in 2015 showed a radial heat signature spreading outward from the summit like a heartbeat, a pulse every 42 minutes. The footage was uploaded to a forum and deleted within hours. But archived screenshots remain faint, rings glowing beneath the surface, too perfect for geology, too persistent for weather. Then there are the reflections. People who bring mirrors or polished objects to the hill report seeing things that shouldn't be visible: distant figures, strange skies, lights that move behind their own reflection. One woman claimed she saw herself standing behind her own shoulder, smiling, not malevolently, just knowingly. She dropped the mirror. It shattered. When she returned weeks later, the shards were gone. But in their place, embedded in the soil, were small, smooth stone seach shaped like a lens. No structures have ever been found here. No ruins. No artifacts. But perhaps that's the point. Perhaps the hill isn't meant to reveal itself through excavation. Perhaps it's the structure. And we, walking across its surface, are not observers but particles in its machine, measured, positioned, reflected. Because some places are not for seeing, they are for remembering what it feels like to be seen. North of Big Sur, where the cliffs meet fog and the ocean seems to lean in closer with every wave, lies a stretch of forest that appears like all the others at first. Tall redwoods, tangled undergrowth, trails carved by deer and forgotten hikers. But deeper in, past where the sunlight fades even at midday, the forest changes. The trees grow too close. The moss thickens like a curtain, and sound begins to bend, not vanish, bend. Locals have given it a name they rarely speak aloud: the Mirrorwood, a place where, they say, nothing is quite itself, where your footsteps echo back not once but twice, and the second echo is late. The Ohlone once used this land as a border knot between tribes, but between realms. They believed the Mirrorwood was not sacred or cursed, but inverted, a space out of alignment with the rest of the world. They entered only for ceremony, never for shelter, and never at night. Walkers report paths that change behind them, trees that seem to shift slightly when not observed, and sometimes a figure ahead identical in every detail, taking the same step, pausing at the same moment, but facing the wrong direction. One man followed what he believed was his friend for over a mile, only to find that friend waiting back at the car, never having entered the woods at all. In 1991, a field recorder collecting ambient sounds captured a 23-minute clip that defies explanation. The audio features forest noises, wind, birds, rustling leaves, but layered beneath it is another track. The same sounds, slightly slower, as if mirrored backward and played with a delay of 2 seconds. This audio, when played at full volume, causes nausea, confusion, and in some listeners a compulsion to walk. No wildlife dens exist within the Mirrorwood, no nests, no burrows, yet animals pass through it, always quickly, as if the forest does not allow rest. Campers who've stayed overnight describe dreams that bleed into waking, dreams of standing across from themselves in a forest made of glass, of seeing versions of their own face emerge from the bark, blinking in slow rhythm, of voices that don't speak, but repeat what the listener is about to say. And then there's the phenomenon of the pause. Hikers sometimes stop suddenly, inexplicably, not because of sound or sight, but a sensation that the world around them is frozen. Wind halts, leaves stop mid-fall, even insects go silent. For a moment, 2, maybe 3 seconds sits as if the forest takes a breath, and then, just as gently, it releases. There's no documented entry into the core of the Mirrorwood. No map marks its center. But those who wander far enough speak of a clearing where no sound exists, not muffled, absent. And at the center, a pool of water so still, it reflects the stars even in daylight. No one has touched the water, not because of fear, but because, somehow, they know it would reflect something else, something they weren't ready to see. Some forests grow, some remember, and some reflect. Not what is, but what could be, or once was, or should never have been. Because some places aren't haunted, they are haunting. Deep in the Tehachapi Mountains, beyond the last cattle fence and beyond the reach of radio towers, there exists a canyon that doesn't show up on topographic maps, not because it's hidden, because it's in flux. Locals call it Shifting Hollow, a name passed down in whispers and warnings, often accompanied by a half-laugh meant to cover discomfort. The canyon doesn't resist entry. It simply forgets you were ever there. From above, the terrain looks normal. Steep walls, scrub brush, rock faces etched with age. But walk into the canyon, and something alters. Distances stretch. The light bends subtly. The shadows are sharper, and they don't fall where they should. Hikers describe turning a corner and arriving at a place they already passed. Others speak of trails that split when unobserved, as if choice itself becomes unstable here. The Kawaiisu tribe never entered the hollow. Their stories refer to it only as the breath beneath the hills, a living space, a place that dreams. Not evil, but indifferent. They left offerings at its edge, not to appease something, but to remind it they were real. In 1974, a small geological team attempted to chart the area using early GPS prototypes. Over the course of 5 days, their coordinates drifted more than 5 miles, despite being stationary. Their notes record an echo that returned not immediately, but with delay and variation, as if the canyon wasn't reflecting sound, but translating it. They also recorded something else: vibration, a low pulse through the soles of their boots. Not seismic, not mechanical, rhythmic, like a heartbeat under stone. When they returned to submit their findings, they discovered that none of their photographs had developed. Every roll of film was blank, not overexposed empty. Those who've camped overnight speak of something stranger than fear: dislocation. A sensation that their thoughts no longer belong entirely to them, as if memories are being shared across something wider. A chorus of minds, whispering just below perception. Some awake with fragments of dreams that do not feel like dreams at all. Visions of underground vaults with breathing walls, tunnels lit by impossible geometry, and signs in languages that feel like they were once known. There is also the matter of the stone. Near the entrance to the canyon lies a flat, black boulder embedded with mineral streaks in the shape of a spiral identical to petroglyphs, found hundreds of miles away in unrelated sites. This spiral, when traced with a finger, produces a tingling sensation in the fingertips. Always in the same place, always in the same hand. Recently, satellite LiDAR imaging picked up a cavern system beneath the hollow. Vast, ordered, intersecting at angles that defy natural formation. The images were pulled from public servers without explanation. The research team that published the data has since gone silent. And so the canyon waits. No boundary marks it, no warning protects it. It doesn't lure, it doesn't threaten. It simply shifts slowly, patiently, like a lung inhaling and exhaling between dimensions. Not closed, not open, just ajar. Because some places don't want to be explored, they want to be felt. And if you listen long enough to the hollow's breath, you begin to wonder, is this the earth dreaming us? Or are we the dream it's trying to forget? In the dry lands beyond Barstow, where the sun burns the horizon into mirage and sound seems to vanish before it can echo, there lies a stretch of desert called simply the Grid. No one knows who named it. The name doesn't appear on maps, but among certain circles, desert dwellers, fringe researchers, and long-haul trucker sits, spoken with a kind of reverence or caution. From above, the Grid appears ordinary. Sand, rock, heat waves. But over the decades, pilots have reported seeing faint lines etched into the Earth, straight lines, miles long, running parallel and perpendicular in a near-perfect matrix. These lines don't show up on the ground. You can stand directly atop one and see only dirt. But from the air, and especially at dusk, they glow faintly. Not light, but a difference in texture. A pattern not drawn, but embedded. Some have tried to explain the mold surveying markers, ancient trails, Cold War test grids. But none of these theories hold. The spacing is too exact, the alignment too perfect. The lines have been visible since the earliest aerial photos of the area, and yet no one has ever documented who made them or why. In the 1930s, a desert hermit claimed to have mapped the full layout by walking it barefoot over the course of years. He drew a massive geometric diagram on the wall of his shack, concentric squares, intersected by spirals and starbursts. When asked what it meant, he simply said, "It's not for us. It's what watches us." The shack burned down. The diagram, drawn in ash on the floor, remained. People who visited the Grid often report a subtle unease, a feeling not of being watched, but counted, like every step is measured, recorded, added to something vast. Watches stop working. Phones lose signal. Shadows stretch too far, as if pulled by something deep beneath the sand. One researcher placed a row of magnets along a known segment. By morning, they had rearranged themselves, flipped, inverted, but still aligned to the invisible line. There are no structures out here, no ruins, no signs of habitation. But buried just inches below the surface are black stone smooth, flattened, and arranged in straight rows. Dig deeper, and they vanish, as if the earth permits only a glimpse before it erases the evidence. Some say the grid is a map. Others think it's a machine. But there is another theory, that it is a script, a message written across the land in a language we don't yet know how to see. Not for us. Not even for now. But for something future. Or something returning. Dreams follow those who walk the lines. Dreams of towers made of glass and bone, humming with electric breath. Of lights pulsing in time with your heartbeat. Of standing before an altar that is also an interface, waiting for input. But no one knows what to offer. Because some messages are not meant to be read. They are meant to be felt through footsteps, through silence, through the dust settling between ancient alignments. And the grid does not ask for meaning. It simply waits for something to recognize itself within it. In the Sierra Nevada foothills, tucked between forgotten mining towns and burned-out pines, lies a lake that isn't always there. Locals call it Phantom Lake, not because of ghosts, but because of its refusal to remain. Some years, it appears overnight after a heavy rain, stretching wide across a dry basin, as if it had always been there. Other years, the rain falls harder, and the lake doesn't come at all. It is not fed by a river. It is not sustained by a spring. Yet when it does appear, the water is deep, glassy, and disturbingly still. No ripples, no wind across its surface, and no reflection of stars, only the sky, empty and black. The Maidu spoke of this place in half-phrases and warnings. They said the lake was not water, but memory, that when it appeared, it was a sign the world had begun remembering something it had agreed to forget. They spoke of travelers who looked too long into its surface and returned changed, not mad, not sick, just misaligned. In the 1950s, a prospector built a cabin near the lake's dry bed. He logged the seasons, the rains, the silence. His journal, later recovered by hikers, contained a single entry for the spring of 1956. The lake came back, but the reflection isn't mine. He disappeared weeks later. Geological studies have attempted to measure the depression and assess the soil's ability to retain water. None can explain why the lake appears at inconsistent depths in identical conditions, or why, when drained by emergency crews during wildfire season, it refills by morning without rain. One hydrologist, skeptical of the myths, spent the night on its shore during a dry year. No water, just dust and insects. But he claimed he could hear waves faint and rhythmic coming from beneath the ground. He recorded hours of audio. The next day he was found wandering several miles away, barefoot, whispering coordinates that pointed not to the lake but to the stars. Those who have dared swim in it tell of a strange sensation, not fear, but weightlessness beyond physics. That the water feels thick, like thought. That submerged objects vanish, not beneath the surface, but elsewhere. One man dropped a silver pendant into the water. Years later, his daughter, living hundreds of miles away, found the same pendant embedded in a tree trunk during a hike. It had no rust, no weathering, just the faint impression of an eye etched into the metal. Dreams follow the lake like a tide. Of cities beneath the water, lit from below by structures that vibrate instead of shine. Of enormous wheels turning slowly just out of sight. Of figures in robes that stand on the surface, not walking, not floating, just waiting, always waiting. No one has ever seen it arrive. It is either there or not. And perhaps Phantom Lake is not a lake at all. Perhaps it is a window, a pocket of stillness, where the boundaries between above and below thin, just enough for something else to look through, or step through. Because some places are not haunted. They are haunting something else. And when the water returns, it's not just a reflection that stares back. It's a question, one that hasn't yet been asked aloud. Along the desolate coastline north of Point Arena, where waves gnaw endlessly at jagged cliffs and the sky feels 1 degree darker than it should, there lies a beach that shifts location. Locals have no fixed name for it. Some call it the Gray Strand. Others refuse to speak of it at all. What they agree on is this: the beach moves, not daily, not predictably, but undeniably. Surfers, hikers, and drifters have stumbled upon it by accident, always unexpectedly, often at twilight. One moment, there's a bend in the trail. The next, a narrow path opens between cypress trees, leading to shorelines no map has ever recorded. But when they try to return the next day, the path is gone. The beach is gone, and only the sound of wind through broken branches remains. Those who find it describe it as wrong, but not frightening. The sand is too fine, almost powdered. The water is unnaturally still despite the wind. And the shells scattered across the beach don't belong to any known marine life spirals within spirals. Translucent as bone, some warm to the touch. The Pomo people left pictographs near this coast's strange spirals, beside human figures with elongated heads and eyes shaped like teardrops. Oral traditions mention a place where the sea walks inland, and where people vanish by remembering too clearly. Scholars dismiss these as metaphor, but the tide keeps bringing things in. In 2003, a marine biologist recorded sonar anomalies along this stretch of coastline. Beneath the surface, a pattern of echoes, rhythmic, melodic, as if from a massive, slow-moving body that shouldn't exist. His vessel's readings captured what appeared to be a structure, hexagonal, hollow, and moving against the current at impossible angles. The data was dismissed by his institute. He resigned 2 months later. Those who visit the Gray Strand often return with strange items. Coins that don't match any minting. Small orbs of glass filled with shifting fog. One person found a key ornate, corroded, impossibly old, and claimed it opened a dream door she'd been visiting since childhood. She moved away and refused to speak of it again. Dreams seem to follow all who've seen the beach. Of tide pools that reflect not the sky, but stars that don't exist. Of voices echoing in reverse, asking questions in tones too slow to understand. One man described standing knee-deep in water, surrounded by figures made of light and salt, humming as if tuning the air. And then there's the sand. Brought home in jars or on shoes, it never stays. People report waking to find it gone and no trace, no spill, no residue. One woman placed a sealed jar on her mantle. By morning, it was empty. The glass fogged from within. There's no consensus on what the Gray Strand is. A fold in the coastline? A temporal seam? A memory pushed into geography? But there's one common thread. It only appears when unlooked for. When one is lost, distracted, or thinking of something far away. Because some places don't exist on the map. They exist in the margins of experience, waiting not to be found, but remembered. And the sea, as it turns out, has deeper memories than we do. South of Mono Lake, where alkaline waters reflect a sky too wide for comfort, and the land fractures into steam vents and silence, there is a plateau the maps forgot. Not hidden, just bypassed. As if surveyors saw it, recorded it, and then erased it from memory. The locals call it the still table. Not because it is unmoving, but because it feels as though motion does not belong there. From a distance, the plateau looks like any other. Flat, barren, scattered with rock. But step onto it, and something shifts. Footsteps sound dull, like walking on cloth. The air thickens, not with heat or pressure, but presence. Sound fades faster. Voices don't carry. And time feels stalled. Not paused, but slowed, like honey trying to remember how to drip. The Paiute once warned travelers not to cross it. They believed it was a place where thoughts became visible, where memory could be pulled from the body like thread. They told stories of people who walked in with secrets and walked out without names, not lost extracted. There is a stone in the center of the plateau, circular, flat, embedded with metallic streaks that no tool has been able to identify or date. It rings when struck not with a note, but a tone, low, harmonic. That sound has been recorded and mapped always the same, regardless of temperature, season, or force. A perfect pitch that seems to vibrate within bone. In 1986, a group of sound engineers camped on the plateau to test long-distance frequency transmission. The signals bounced back, not delayed, but early returning before they were sent. One technician fainted. He later described a sensation of being outside time, as if he had watched his own voice spiral backward into silence. Their data was confiscated. None of them returned to audio work again. Geologists say the still table shouldn't exist. The rock beneath it is older than the surrounding strata. The soil contains compounds not found elsewhere in the region, and magnetic readings fluctuate wildly like a pendulum swinging through invisible fields. Visitors often experience vivid visions, some lasting seconds, others hours. One woman described seeing herself from above, walking slowly, while dozens of versions of herself moved around her, each out of sync by moments. Another claimed to speak fluently in a language she'd never learned, then forgot it upon leaving the plateau. And always, there is the sensation of being watched not from around, but from beneath, as if something vast and ancient lies dormant just below the surface, not sleeping, but waiting for the correct arrangement of thought to unlock a memory too large for one mind. Dreams after visiting the still table are rarely linear. They involve geometry, sound, and sensation. Many dream of a chamber beneath stone, filled with slowly rotating cubes of light, each emitting a different tone. In the center, a being made of shifting mirrors. No face, no form, just reflection. Watching, waiting. No fences surround the plateau, no signs warn against crossing, but few return twice. Not because they are afraid, but because they feel they already left something behind, or took something they shouldn't have. Because some places are not destinations, they are questions. And the moment you step onto the still table, the question begins asking you. Tucked away in the hills east of Ojai, where oak groves whisper even without wind, and the mountains cast shadows far larger than their height, there exists a cave system that's not listed on any hiking map. It's simply called the Resonance. Not because of echoes, though there are many, but because of what people claim to feel when inside. Not sound, not vibration, something in between. A presence that hums just below the chest, in that place where instinct lives. The entrance is narrow, carved by centuries of runoff, easily missed if you aren't looking for it. But the moment one steps inside, the temperature drops not with cold, but with stillness. A perfect silence, deeper than absence. The kind of quiet that makes your own thoughts feel too loud. No light penetrates far into the cave. Flashlights work, but sometimes flicker, as though the darkness presses back. Explorers who venture more than 100 feet in often report disorientation. Not from tunnels twisting, but from the space itself refusing to remain consistent. Some have mapped the cave, only to return days later and find passages shifted, narrowed, or gone entirely. The Chumash people considered this place sacred, not holy, not forbidden, simply understood as boundary. A place where the earth's breath could be heard and sometimes answered. Petroglyphs at the mouth of the cave show concentric rings, humanoid forms with spiraled faces, and symbols no scholar has fully translated. Some believe they are maps not of the cave, but of sound. In 1979, a group of musicians and acoustic researchers attempted an experiment. They brought tuning forks, Tibetan bowls, and a portable sound lab into the central chamber. Upon striking a C note at a specific frequency, they recorded a harmonic that did not decay. It held, sustained, as if the cave itself was joining in. The equipment shorted minutes later. The lead researcher later described it as finding a throat in the stone. Those who've spent prolonged time inside speak of hallucinations, but again, too consistent to dismiss. Visions of ancient machinery embedded in the rock. Not mechanical, but living lattice stonework that pulses with internal rhythm. Others claim to have heard voices, not whispers, but chants, layered and recursive. singing in languages they don't speak yet somehow understand. One account, written in a journal found near the site, tells of a man who sat in the darkness until he could no longer hear his own heartbeat. When he finally stood to leave, he found the cave behind him was gone. Only earth, only silence. He dug through for hours, days, or maybe minutest time was unclear. When he emerged, he was barefoot, and his watch had stopped. But his journal recorded dozens of lines written in ink he never remembered using, in symbols no one could translate. People who visit the resonance often leave changed not outwardly, but in rhythm. They speak more slowly. They hum when they think. Some stop speaking altogether, preferring to tap patterns with their fingers or draw repeating spirals on napkins and walls. Theories abound: geomagnetic anomalies, auditory hallucinations, psychoacoustic effects. But none explain the dreams. Of corridors that spiral forever inward, of doors that open when no one is near, of songs that seem to come from the stone itself, calling, repeating, not in melody but in invitation. Because some places are not echo chambers, they are instruments, waiting for the right note, the right mind, the right memory to play them back. And the cave does not forget. Just outside the city of Redding, where the Sacramento River slips between fractured hills and the air grows heavier with the smell of iron and moss, there lies a hill that hums. It has no official name, but those who've lived nearby the longest call it the Coil. Not for what it looks like, but for what it does. A pull, a twist, a quiet folding of direction and memory that spirals inward the longer one stays. The Coil is overgrown. Nothing dramatic. Just scrub brush, dried grass, small trees that lean slightly uphill, always uphill, as if something beneath them is drawing them in. Birds circle above it but never land. Deer skirt its edge. And phones, when carried to the summit, freeze and not crash, not shut off, just freeze, as if pausing to consider whether to continue. Ancient stories from the Wintu people describe the hill as a place of unraveling, a spot where the spirit loosens, floats, wanders. Not death, not vision, something in between. A place to visit once and never twice. Hikers report a sense of misalignment while climbing it. Steps feel heavier near the top. GPS data shows minor inconsistencies in altitude, not elevation gain, but fluctuations within the same coordinates, as if the summit exists in overlapping layers. People speak of a ringing in the ears just before reaching the crest, a single tone that slowly rises until it suddenly stops. What's most unusual is the ground itself. Covered in reddish soil, the summit hosts a shallow depression, roughly 8 feet wide. Not a crater, a bowl, perfectly round. In the center lies a stone no one can move. It isn't large, it just doesn't lift. Metal objects placed on it heat slowly, despite ambient temperature. No electromagnetic explanation has held, no seismic activity. And yet, the rock feels like it's listening. One visitor in 1998 placed a tuning fork against it and struck it. Instead of resonance, the fork absorbed the sound, went completely silent. When removed, it snapped in half. No fracture line, just separated. Others speak of the sky darkening momentarily only at the summitas, if a filter had passed between the sun and earth. One researcher brought a prism to measure light behavior and reported a missing band of color. Not shifted, missing, blue, specifically, as if something had swallowed that frequency entirely. And then there's the sensation of movement. Some report standing still, yet feeling like they're turning. Not spinning, but coiling slowly around an invisible axis. Time moves differently, here not faster, not slower, but staggered. You speak, and your voice arrives late. You think, and the thought arrives early, like being out of sync with yourself. Dreams following visits to the Coil often involve spiral staircases, infinite libraries, and voices that speak in echoes of your own. One dream journal, anonymously published online, describes meeting a version of oneself aged impossibly far into the future, silent, smiling, and holding a stone with a pulse. Theories range from natural vortex to psychological suggestion to ancient machine buried deep below. But perhaps the coil isn't buried. Perhaps it is the topmost edge of something much deeper, something vast, circular, and alive. Because some places are not anomalies, they are expressions, a gesture from beneath, a breath caught mid-exhale. And the coil continues to turn, with or without us. In a narrow valley east of Lake Isabella, shielded by steep, crumbling slopes and half-collapsed mine shafts, there lies a grove that should not be green. The locals call it the last orchard. It isn't marked on any agricultural registry, nor does it appear on satellite scans with any consistency. But if you walk through the scorched brush and down a gully no one remembers cutting, you'll see them. Dozens of trees, gnarled, ancient, still bearing fruit. The trees aren't uniform. Some resemble peach, others fig, others something unidentifiable, small round bulbs that emit a faint light in twilight. No one knows who planted them. No irrigation. No clear source of water. Yet the soil is always moist, and the leaves never fall. The Kawiisu have a story half-poem, half-warning about the grove that waited for the end. They spoke of a place planted not by people, but by memory itself. A place that would only grow when everything else had begun to fade. Where the fruit was not nourishment, but remembering. Where every bite returned, a moment once lost. In the 1940s, a botanist named Ruth Caldwell documented the grove in a private journal. She described intense déjà vu upon entering, as if the trees recognized her. She collected samples. Days later, she disappeared. Her notes were found buried near the trunk of a large central tree, with a simple phrase repeated over and over in graphite. I see myself, but earlier. The fruit itself is not always visible. It appears most often when unlooked for, glowing faintly at dusk or just before sunrise. Those who've eaten it speak of memories not their own. Entire childhoods lived in a blink. Language is suddenly understood. One man, a plumber from Bakersfield, claimed to recall the sensation of birth not his own, but someone else's. He stopped speaking after that. He now tends his own orchard, in silence. Temperature inside the grove remains constant, regardless of season. Snow never settles. Insects avoid it. Wind dies at its edge. And the air smells faintly not of sweetness, but of old paper, burnt cedar, and rain that hasn't fallen yet. Strangely, photos taken within the grove show slight warping at the edge's curvature that suggests bending space. Trees lean in directions they shouldn't. Paths curve and return. One photographer stitched dozens of images together to create a panorama. When he looked at the final product, he realized the path spelled something. A spiral, a symbol, or a signature. Dreams after visiting the orchard are vivid, but not frightening. They involve re-encounters with places long since demolished, voices from childhood, even smells that can't be named. The common thread is always Timonot as a river, but as a circle folding inward. Many wake with tears. A few do not wake at all. And then, there are those who return to the orchard, only to find nothing. No trees, no grove, just scorched hillside and wind. Because some places don't grow from seed. They grow from longing, from memory trying to root itself into matter, from a world that remembers, even when we forget. And the last orchard waits not for harvest, but for recognition. South of the Carrizo Plain, where the San Andreas Fault carves scars into the bones of the earth, there's a slope that doesn't match the rest of the land. It lends not in angle, but in intent, like it wants to tip, but is being held back by something unseen. This place has no official designation, but among the few who study it, it's called the Angle of Sleep. It's not large, barely 100 meters wide, just a rise in the terrain covered in tall grass and brittle wildflowers that never bloom. But those who step onto it feel it immediately, a weight behind the eyes, a warmth in the spine, and a pull knot, downward, but sideways, like gravity is thinking of changing its mind. The Chumash warned of places where dreams crawl up from underneath, where the body does not rest, but is watched. They marked such places with stones arranged in narrow chevrons. A few of those patterns have been found here half buried, worn, precise. They do not form a circle or a line. They form an arrow, and they all point west, to the slope. In the 1960s, a seismologist studying microquakes in the area camped on the slope for 2 nights. He documented fluctuations in local gravity measurable, real but impossible to explain. His compass spun at regular intervals. Metal objects hummed faintly when placed on the ground. He left his instruments running and fled. The recordings captured a low, rhythmic tone, repeating every 23 minutes. Not seismic, not mechanical. A voice that never rose above a whisper. Those who nap or sleep on the slope report experiences too consistent to ignore. Vivid, lucid dreams of structures buried below not buildings, but rooms without walls. Spaces that hum with breath. Many describe floating through narrow corridors of bone-white light. Others speak of voices reciting lists of names in languages they don't know but understand. One man awoke, whispering coordinates. When mapped, they formed a spiral across 5 continents, ending in the Pacific. There's a tree at the center of the slope, or what remains of one, charred, hollow, but never fallen. Inside the trunk, the bark folds inward like a funnel. One woman leaned her head inside and claimed she heard music notes without instruments, melody without rhythm. She stayed for hours. When pulled away, she wept not from fear, but recognition. She said, "I've been here before, but I wasn't me." Objects left on the slope vanish. Not always, but often. A backpack, a tent stake, a journal, in their place. Sometimes, just sometimes, there's a stone, smooth, warm, and marked with a single line. Always curved, always part of a larger shape you'll never see. And then there are the silences. Every few weeks, the slope goes completely quiet. No birds, no insects, no wind, just absence. These silences last exactly 7 minutes and return without warning. Some say it's when the slope listens. Others think it's when it dreams. Or worse, when it wakes. Because some places aren't haunted by ghosts. They are haunted by futures that haven't happened yet. Possibilities that echo backward through time. And the angle of sleep isn't waiting for you to lie down. It's waiting to lie down inside you. At the edge of the Anza Borrego Desert, beyond where the trails end and the sand begins to mirror the sky, there lies a formation known only to a few as the Chambered Mesa. On maps, it appears as nothing more than a flat-topped rise, a heat-bleached outcrop lost among 1,000 others. But those who've climbed it speak of something else, something vast, something internal. The hike is unremarkable. Harsh sun, loose rock, shifting gravel. But as one nears the summit, things begin to change. The wind quiets, the heat softens, the colors dull, as if saturation itself is being leached from the world. And then, the path narrows not physically, but perceptually. Every step feels preordained, like moving through memory rather than space. The Kumeyaay tell of a mesa where the sky once opened and something stepped down. Not a god, not a being, but a pattern. They spoke of songs carved into stone, notes too old to hear with ears, meant only for stone and silence. Their symbols etched into nearby rocks resemble doors, always closed, never unlocked. Until recently. In 2007, a geologist from UC Riverside conducted a LiDAR scan of the mesa for erosion mapping. The results showed hollow structures inside. Not caves, rooms. Cubic voids arranged in a spiral that descends below the mesa's center. The walls of these voids reflect no seismic signature. They do not echo. When bored into, they do not give. The drills vibrate, then stop, and the sound disappears. People who spend time on top report a strange sequence of thoughts, not dreams, not hallucinations, like receiving someone else's memories out of order. Glimpses of machines made of dust and light, of tall figures with no faces, writing with movement instead of ink, of clocks that count backward. One woman described seeing her own birth, but from beneath the floor. On the southern face, a section of the mesa bears strange erosion, marks straight, deep, and rhythmic, as if something once opened there, folded, and closed again. Metal objects placed near this face emit high-pitched tones when struck. Not all of them, just the ones that have been in space. There are no animals here, no insects, no nests, no droppings. The mesa does not support life, but it does not repel it either. It simply waits. Campers speak of a humming that comes from beneath, so low it registers not in sound, but in the teeth. Sometimes at night, the ground becomes warm not from sun, but from within, glowing faintly along cracks invisible during the day. Lines form briefly in the dusk geometric, ancient, always incomplete before vanishing with the wind. And then there are the lights, tiny pulses just under the surface, not visible head-on, but caught at the edge of vision. Blue, white, and something else, something that doesn't correspond to any known spectrum. People call it the other color, the one we forgot how to see, because some places are not built, they are grown, not by hand or weather, but by thought, by repetition, by something remembering itself into stone. And the chambered mesa does not rise from the desert floor. It rises from below time. West of Mount Shasta, hidden among pine forests that seem too symmetrical to be natural, there lies a clearing that appears only once every few years, always in the same place, but never visible for long. Those who have seen it call it the circle of glass. But there is no glass, only the sensation of being seen through. Satellite images show nothing, just trees. But hikers, often lost or wandering, find themselves suddenly standing within a perfect ring roughly 30 feet across, where no vegetation grows, no birds sing, and the air hums with an absence, too dense to be silence. The grass is black, but not burnt. The soil is cool, even in summer, and at the exact center lies a single stone, polished smooth with no markings. It reflects everything except the person looking into it. The Wintu legends mention a place where the sun refuses to speak, a space not meant for humans, but for remembering something before us. Not beings, not ancestors, something more elemental. Memory as architecture, thought as terrain. In 1983, a man hiking alone in the region stumbled upon the clearing. He sat at its edge for hours, unable or unwilling to enter. He later wrote that every time he tried to step forward, he saw flashes of places he had never been, oceans that rose vertically, mountains with doors carved into their peaks, cities that hung upside down in a twilight sky. When he finally stepped into the center, he collapsed. His watch stopped at exactly 3 p.m. It never worked again. He left the clearing at dusk and was found 2 days later, 40 miles north, barefoot and smiling. The ground within the circle cannot be dug. Shovels snap, picks bounce. The soil offers no resistance because it offers no cooperation, as if it isn't really soil at all, but the memory of soil perfectly held. Those who enter it report vivid auditory hallucinations, whispers that don't speak in language but in rhythm, patterns that mirror their own heartbeat. Some feel emotions that aren't theirs: grief with no cause, joy with no trigger, longing for a home they've never seen. At night, the circle glows faintly, not visible to the eye, but captured on long exposure film, a halo, a veil. And when lightning strikes anywhere within a 20-mile radius, it bends zarsing toward the clearing as if pulled. There are reports, always unconfirmed, of people disappearing here, not vanishing in the moment, but slowly. Friends say they become quiet, obsessed, drawn to silence. Their voices soften, their words turn metaphorical. And then, one day, they don't come back. Only a faint ring remains in the soil where their tent once stood. The circle isn't a destination, it's a cipher, a fulcrum, where all the strangeness of California, its anomalies, its legends, its whispers and watchers seems to fold together into a single moment. A final question wrapped in the illusion of place. Because California is not just land, it's a memory system, an interface, a mirror too large to see, reflecting not who we are, but who we've always been beneath the noise. And now that the circle has been completed, one must ask, was it waiting for us? Or were we always meant to return? The fog lifts, the winds still, and the whispers fade for now. We've traveled far across the shadowed edges of California, through dunes that remember footsteps never taken, forests that reflect more than light, and deserts that hum with forgotten intention. We've listened to caves that speak without language, and walked paths that may not exist tomorrow, not to find answers, but to feel the question more deeply. Because the mystery was never meant to be solved, only seen. There are places still left off maps, names lost in dust, and stories that circle the edge of waking, waiting to be told. California holds them all, not just as legend, but as possibility. And if we listen closely, if we look again, really look, we may begin to realize that the strange isn't out there. It's around us, beneath us, within us. And if this journey stirred something in you, a memory you never lived, a curiosity you thought you'd forgotten, then this is just the beginning. If you felt the pull of these stories, if the unexplained called out to you, then stay with us. Like the land, we're only beginning to unfold. Like, subscribe, and follow for more explorations into the hidden, the haunted, and the long-forgotten corners of our world. Because the map is not the territory, and some truths are still waiting to be remembered.